Hello and welcome to Faith, Philosophy and Life with me, Mr. Shelton. It's great that you joined me again. We're currently looking at a unit on life and death. Today's topic is quite a sensitive one, to be perfectly honest with you, and it's one that some of us might struggle with. And it's about euthanasia. Euthanasia is a Greek word that means easy death. Now, behind me is what was affectionately known as the euthanasia pod that was constructed by someone who goes by the name of Dr. Death. He's a medical doctor who believes that it is okay for people to end their lives if they've got terminal illness, if they're going to die anyway. Better for them to be put to sleep like you might a cat. And we're going to be thinking a little bit today. Now, the idea of this is that he actually put these designs online so that they could be 3D printed. Strangely, they were taken down, and I think so for good reason. But that's what that is behind me anyway. And the idea was that you 3D printed it, and then you got in it, and using a gas you killed yourself. Understandably, that was not seen as being acceptable, and was very reminiscent of another horror in the Second World War. But on a slightly, I would say happier, but there isn't actually a happier note here. This was my old cat, Jett. Jett was a lovely little cat, and my wife worked for a vet, and what happened was one day she rang me and she said that a cat had been brought in, had been hit by a car, and they had nowhere to home it. The RSPCA was full, the Cats Protection League was full, and so she said, listen, we either need to take it or we'll have to put it down. And we didn't know what was wrong with Jett, but we had the option of putting it down because it was a pet. It was an animal, even though it wasn't ours. Well, we adopted it, we took it home, and Jett lived with us for 15 years, and it was lovely for that time. Jett was a really faithful little cat, to be honest with you, and eventually Jett ended up with cancer, and we had to take him to the vets and put him to sleep. We got to the point that it just wasn't fair for him being alive. And there's lots of positives to be able to do that for an animal. But then the question would be, why can't you do that for a person? If a person's cognitive, they're able to think, and they want it to happen to them, why does the law prevent us from doing it? And is that actually really fair? Here's another one to think about. I want you to imagine an elderly patient in hospital, and they've got some sort of terminal illness. They are not going to get better. And they know that the last couple of months of their life is going to be very painful. They ask to be put to sleep like you would with Jett. Would you do it? Would you think that's fair? Would that be right to do? Now, obviously, that is their choice. If they were unconscious and you knew they were in pain, it wouldn't be their choice. But would that make it any more acceptable? And then, lastly, imagine a premature baby. You can't speak. You don't know what's wrong with it. You know that it's in pain. Would it be acceptable to turn the life support machines off on that baby? What's that different from the old woman? Is it more or is it less acceptable? See, these are the things that we really need to be thinking about during today's session. So, I'd like you to grab your pen and your bit of paper, because here's our cheesy intro music. Okay, so our title today is Should Euthanasia Be Legalised? Should euthanasia be legalised? We're going to investigate what Christians think about euthanasia. In a classroom, we'd use talk to clarify ideas, but you're just going to have to think about it if you're watching this at home. A good outcome would be if you know what euthanasia means, with most of you explaining where the word comes from. A great outcome would be that you can explain how Christians can argue both for and against euthanasia, and even better if you can explain what the hospice movement is and how it can help. And we're going to spend some more time on the hospice movement next lesson. During today's session then, we've done our good, bad and interesting. We're going to think about quality of life. We're going to look at some definitions, arguments for and against, and hospices, and then a D-style question as well. Now, what you need to know is that there is a description, there's a link in the description below with a worksheet which you need for during today's lesson, and that will help you and guide you through today more effectively. So please access that. So, euthanasia means easy death. That's its translation, mercy killing or easy death. Euthanasia is helping someone to die to ease their suffering, especially if the person is suffering from a painful, debilitating and incurable illness. It is different than suicide, because suicide could be someone just choosing to end their life because they can't cope anymore. Euthanasia needs to be if someone is already going to die due to an illness. Now, obviously, it's illegal within the UK. There are very few places around the world where it is legal, but there is always a growing argument within Parliament that suggests that we should legalise euthanasia. Just have a quick look at these pictures below. What you've got is you've got a woman who seems to have a butler and a swimming pool, and you've got on the right hand side, letter E, you've got a woman with a toddler in a tiny room. And I'd normally ask the question in my class, who has the greater quality of life? Who is it that has the better life? Most people would plot for D, understandably, straight away. Now, then I'd change the situation and say, right, now just imagine that the woman in D is unable to move. She's got some sort of illness, a disability, and the person that's there is actually someone who's a carer. But D is a single mum that lives by herself with baby. Well, most people would then say E has a better quality of life because, well, they're able to get out. And then change it again and talk about E being an eviction and D being that she's got lots of family that come and visit, whereas with E, no family ever come and visit. Who has the better quality of life then? And then there becomes a big debate about that. So quality of life is a really important thing to consider when balancing it with sanctity of life that you looked at previously. So sanctity of life being life is sacred, life is important. This is about quality of life. So we're now going to look at some key terms. I'd like you to see if you can match up the ones on the left to the ones on the right. So the ones on the left are your words and the ones on the right are the definitions. Make sure your sheet, you read your sheet carefully because they're in a slightly different order than what they're on the screen behind me. So pause me now and let's just get linking those up. Okay, so these are the answers then. Passive would go to the person is terminally ill, treatment is withdrawn, allow nature to take its course, no one does anything to actually physically kill the person. That happens a lot within the UK. That's general practice in medicine. Somebody's going to die, and take them off life support machine, and then that occurs. So that part is legal, even though we wouldn't necessarily class that as euthanasia because it's passive rather than active. Active then is someone takes an action to kill a patient, gives them an injection or a pill to help them die peacefully. Then you've got voluntary, which is the person is able to make their own decision about whether they want euthanasia or not. And then you've got involuntary, which is the person is unable to make a decision for themselves, so the doctors and family make a decision for them. You can have combinations of these. So you could have active voluntary, where someone wants it to happen to them and someone takes an active policy, an active process to kill the person. Active voluntary is generally what we understand by euthanasia, but then you've got passive involuntary, which is about someone on a life support machine where they've not necessarily requested that they get life support machine turned off, but that decision's made anyway. You could have voluntary passive, where they've got a do not resuscitate order, a DNR, do not resuscitate order, where they request in the event of a medical issue that they aren't resuscitated, they aren't tried to be brought back again. And then you've got the big no-no that even people that support euthanasia would disagree with, which is active involuntary, which is basically murder. for want of a better term. So you kind of your two perspectives really to think about: your voluntary active and your passive involuntary. They're kind of the opposite end turns. So active voluntary would be euthanasia, where people have it happen to them because they've requested it, and then you've got involuntary passive, where it would be people on life support machines. So it's important you know the difference between those. So we now know what euthanasia means, and we've started to think about some of the key terms associated with that. So for and against them, what I'd like you to do is to have a look. Well, basically, I'd like you to come up with a list on your sheets about things that are arguments for and against euthanasia. Let's see what you can come up with. So things, let me give you some for free. Made in God's image, do not murder. You've got terms like God created us in the womb. God knows every day of our lives. And then you've got sociological ideas as well, that surely humans are more important than animals, so we should have it happen. The idea that euthanasia isn't legal in the UK, so people are against it. Try and come up with some arguments both for and against euthanasia in Britain. Pause me and then come back to me. Okay, so I'm not going to read this to you. I'd like you to have a read of this over my shoulder, and then that will help you with the hospice section on the worksheet. As I say, we're going to spend a lot more time on hospices next time. Okay, so now we've started to talk about the hospice movement. There's a little bit of Catholic teaching that we need to go into. It's really important we've got this down as well. So again, in the description, there's a Catholic Catechism worksheet. I'd like you to access that, please, and that will give you some information with regards to what the Catholic Church teaches there. I think there's 4 or 5 questions on that for you to answer in your books. So pause me now and let's get that done. And then there's also a case study sheet in there as well, which I'd like you to read over, maybe make a few notes of 1 or 2 of those case studies. Would that support voluntary active euthanasia or not, and why? Why do you think the law might be right? Why won't it be wrong? So have a read over that and try and get some information from that as well, because anything you can use in terms of case studies are really advantageous when it comes to getting those top grade 8, grade 9 results in your exams next summer, because that's another source of authority that you could use as well as biblical quotes. So let's have a look at that now, and then come back to me. Okay, so today then what we've done is we've thought about what the word euthanasia means and where the word comes from. We thought about how Christians can argue both for and against it, and then we thought a little bit about the hospice movement as well. Euthanasia, what's good about it, what's bad about it, and what would you like to ask about it? I'm going to leave it there for you today. Thanks very much for your time. Take care of yourself, stay safe, wash hands. Oh, and can you make sure you send all your work through to your teachers, please? God bless you. I'll see you soon.